Hello, everyone. My name is Lorena Sosa. I'm the executive director and founder of 0 Hour Florida, and I'm so excited to talk to you all about the GenZ Trust Fund panel discussion, where we'll be covering the GenZ Trust Fund and the importance of youth-led climate action. Today, I'll be surrounded by some incredible speakers where we'll be able to talk about the importance of youth-led climate action all across the state of Florida and discuss ways that you can really explore them through history and through a youth perspective. I'm so excited to first begin by discussing the GenZ Trust Fund Pledge, written by 0 Hour Florida, and of course, enter a questioning period for our incredible panelists. So I will screen share a slideshow that we have put together, basically breaking down how we are taking lead of this campaign. Awesome. So this is the GenZ Trust Fund, and here's everything you need to know about our youth-led campaign and how you can get involved. So first of all, welcome to our climate community. 2021 is truly the year for climate action, and the GenZ Trust Fund is an environmental framework that provides Florida youth the opportunity to speak up and demand climate action from their elected officials. This is the time for Generation Z to carry out its bold energy to demand a better, greener world. This document will outline why you should join our campaign. So a little bit of an overview of this document, we'll be discussing what the GenZ Trust Fund is, how we're organizing, and how you can get involved in our campaign, and of course, how you can contact us. So the GenZ Trust Fund is a legislative pledge asking Florida's politicians to take action on climate change for Gen Z's future by passing and supporting the following: a just transition towards renewable energy, complete opposition to fracking and offshore drilling on a state and national level, a prohibition of lobbyist, executive, or PAC money related to the fossil fuel, oil, coal, or big animal agriculture industries, cutting fossil fuel emissions 100% by 2050, prohibiting harmful agricultural practices such as crop burning, harmful synthetic fertilizers such as glyphosates, and large-scale animal agriculture by shifting subsidies towards sustainable agriculture. And of course, you can't forget that Florida is really at its heart with the protection of the Everglades. And a lot of these demands were sculpted from previous issues that have been discussed at the legislative floor in Florida's Capitol Hill. And especially, I think one of the most important ones to consider is the second to last one, given the recent problem that was brought about in Tampa area where there was a huge evacuation. So these are definitely problems that we're seeing within the state of Florida that need to be acted upon. And of course, we really want this pledge to act as a solution for that and to really unify the state towards that action. So some ways that we're organizing this campaign is through social distance events, right? We really want to emphasize that we want to be safe, but also making sure that we're still able to keep that personal connection with people through open mics, literature drops about our campaign and petition, beach cleanups, a digital day of action where teachers can receive a video about our campaign and an infographic about actions youth can take, and of course, this panel discussion. We really want to make sure that youth's message is resonant and it's clear. And of course, we do that through this campaign and just maintaining that personal connection with people. So a little bit about our Digital Day of Action campaign is that we're taking components of our campaign, such as our change.org petition, which has linked the emails of every state senator and House representative to notify them about the support of the GenZ Trust Fund pledge, and then a video promoting the importance of climate action. We'll be dispersing this to schools so students can register their class to receive these materials through a Google form, and teachers can spend 5 to 10 minutes of their class time discussing climate action. So essentially, youth will be able to garner attention for statewide action and the opportunity to get involved. All in all, the point of this is to create cohesive statewide action. We want to connect youth with climate groups and strategies to initiate their own actions within their communities. One great example of this is with This Is Zero Hour's upcoming national campaign that's aimed at really providing local organizers with toolkits to help them with the process of organizing. Some ways that you can get involved in our campaign and support it is if you're a student or individual, you can join our volunteer team, register for a digital day of action, or even help us post flyers around your community. And of course, if you're an organization, you can register your group for a co-sponsorship and join us alongside our partners like Ideas for Us, Climate Cardinals, Veggie Mijas, and more. You can help us post flyers around your community, and of course, you can see the QR codes for those printouts. So of course, I want to take the time to welcome all our incredible speakers joining us today. We'll have Florida House of Representative for District 37, Ana Vishkai Eskamani. We'll have Connor Ehrich from the Florida Youth Climate Strike, and of course, This Is Zero Hour's Deputy Director, Lana Weidgenant. So I'm so excited to join them all today and get to know their perspectives and incredible experiences with youth-led action. So our first question will be with Representative Ana Eskamani, and we'll be talking about the importance of really the beginning of the environmental movement. So my question is really, we know that environmentalism with a legislative stance really began with conservation efforts in the 1800s, later scaling into the creation of national organizations like the Sierra Club and the World Wildlife Fund, which could oversee and negate the development of harmful infrastructure like the 1966 construction of hydraulic dams. Representative Eskamani, what do you think sparked the environmental movement and has kept it alive today?
Well, again, thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to be here with everyone. I love this question because I think it's so important to know where we've come from in order to continue to set the future. And the environmental movement in particular has always come from the grassroots up. It's everyday people that want to protect their neighborhoods, who want to protect their natural resources. You know, folks come to call Florida home because of its pristine beauty. And over the decades, we've seen it be demolished, be developed over. We've seen our water quality stagger. We've seen overpumping of resources. Most recently, Piney Point and the phosphogypsum stacks have created an environment where even some of our neighborhoods that are supposed to be safe from pollution are now at risk. And so we have a foundation in a notion of the personalist political, that what's happening in my backyard has major repercussions, not just for my family and my personal livelihood, but for my entire community. And you saw over time, groups of people who all thought their problems were isolated come together around a common cause, which has led to not only the groups that you listed, but even most recently, climate strikes and different global movements of folks coming together of different ages and backgrounds and experiences, but nonetheless coming together around a common cause of action, holding their policymakers accountable to these environmentally sound standards.
Thank you so much. And I really love that you put that beautiful emphasis on the importance of grassroots movements, because that's what we really need, right? We really need to work with one another and teaching each other all of the important skills there is to organizing to make sure that we can really have a resilient bottom-up movement. And so my next question is really open to all of our speakers. And I'm going to basically ask a question about the youth climate movement in itself, right? Representative Eskamani brought up an incredible point about, how organizing really, you can see it through climate strikes, and especially so many climate strikes prior to the pandemic were organized by incredible youth leaders. And so the youth climate movement seems to be more resilient and varied than ever, especially with the digital movement that we're seeing right now. With the digital development of groups like Extinction Rebellion, who call for civil disobedience through nonviolent actions, and Zero Hour, who use education to be able to train youth all across the world on the importance of climate justice and empower them, we seem unstoppable. So my next question that I'll be posing is, What do you think sparked the environmental movement and has kept it? Oh, sorry. What do you think makes the climate movement different than in the 70s? And then I'd love for Connor Ehrich to begin with this question.
Hi, I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for having me on here today and hosting us all on this panel. I think we have to start off by comparing the context of the climate movement in the 70s versus today. 50 years ago, we certainly had the numbers. I mean, 20 million people rallied on Earth Day in 1970. And during that time, the reality of climate change and global warming had become more apparent. We saw huge steps like the Clean Air Act and the creation of the EPA. But a couple things have changed, and I'll give two that stand out to me. The first was the tone. Environmentalists pushed for change in the 70s, but they didn't have the urgency that you or I have today. And saying our government dropped the ball on handling the climate crisis is definitely an understatement. So while proactive legislation was being advocated for in the 70s, in 2021, we're dashing to pick up the pieces of a quickly degrading planet. And young Americans realize that in our lifetime, we could see some catastrophic change if we don't do a complete 180 on our record when it comes to protecting the Earth. Now, the second and more important thing to me is that in the 70s, we didn't have the comprehensive research that we have today that allows us to recognize the disproportionate impacts of the climate crisis on marginalized communities and by POC. Now, I'd say a majority of climate organizations today center their advocacy in boosting BIPOC voices and protecting frontline communities, something that I would think was far less apparent in climate advocacy of times past. While both eras are important, I'm really glad we're contrasting the two movements in today's panel because they're widely different.
Thank you so much, Connor. I really love that. And I really love that you really just perfectly highlighted those two perspectives because it really is important to recognize and not undermine, right? Because we have so much information now that we can really use to our potential. So now I'd love for Representative Lana Eskamani to answer what she thinks is different about the youth climate movement.
Well, I think that was a beautiful summary, and I really do appreciate the point around centering on Black, Indigenous, and people of color and really integrating environmental justice into the framework. I think the environmental movement really did start out of a lot of well-intentioned and well-meaning people that were concerned about the environment around them. We have to remember that greenwashing has been around for a very long time. And even when we talk about recycling, so many of the major recycling campaigns were funded by the plastic industry because the plastic industry wanted you to keep buying single-use plastic and it was basically trying to lie to the public that every type of plastic is recyclable, so it's okay to use single-use plastic. So we and then we fast forward to today where many of us are much more informed and we're better able to, we're more skilled at accessing information and information is more readily available. So not only is that sense of urgency very real, but we're able to kind of call out the BS in a much more aggressive fashion because we have the facts to back that up. I'll give one example. The sugar industry is super influential in Florida, and they will make up their own science. They have their own scientists that perpetuate their own biased perspective of water usage and of air pollution. Meanwhile, we see Black and brown communities that are impacted by the burning of sugarcane, and they literally struggle to breathe whenever there's sugarcane burning, which takes place 8 months of the year. And so we're able to draw those connections and say, we're not going to take your environmental facts. We're actually going to listen to folks on the ground. We're going to listen to lived experiences. We're going to listen to peer-reviewed scientists versus your scientists and be able to draw our own conclusion on what needs to happen in communities like Belle Glades and so forth. And so I do think that this generation is much more intentional in prioritizing Black and brown voices in the discussion, where in the past it was typically a lot of well-meaning folks, but folks who don't reflect the community making decisions that ultimately can have negative consequences. Because if you're constantly making decisions for other communities and you're leaving those communities out, which means that the outcomes are likely not going to actually benefit every person.
Thank you so much. That was also so beautifully phrased. And I'd love to see how Lana would love to contribute as well. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lorena, for inviting me. And I completely agree with what my other panelists have said, that the movement has become more intersectional, it has become more accessible, and it has also become more personal. Whereas in the 1970s, we were talking about polar bears, biodiversity, graphs of rising emissions. Now we're talking about clean air for ourselves, clean water, a livable future for young people today and for future generations. So it's become something that a lot more people can understand. It's become something that has leadership from those on the front lines, which includes young people who will be most impacted, as well as marginalized populations that have been most oppressed historically and who are being most oppressed today, and also talking about all of these issues in a way that more people can understand, that isn't just, oh, the climate scientists are talking about numbers, but rather all of us understanding that we have to come together for a collective future. And that makes it so much more of an empowering movement for many people, where we understand that this isn't some science issue or something that, you know, we as young people need to get a climate science degree in order to advocate for. It's something that we all need to urgently push for, and it's going to affect all of us. So it's very much a personal intersectional movement at this point.
Thank you so much, Lana. And I think Lana brought up a really important point, right? She explained that we really need to be pushing for a collective future where we're empowering all people, and of course, especially empowering and supporting people of color communities that are most affected by the climate crisis. And so I think at this point, we all understand how much power the United States really holds over really the world's problems related to the climate crisis and the scale of it. And so I'd really love to pose a question for Connor Ehrich on the importance of the following conversation that we've heard all across social media, which is, you know, Biden's pretty close to his 100-day mark, and youth are demanding him to establish an office of young Americans. Why do you think this is important? And overall, how would you like to see Biden carry out an office of young Americans?
Yeah, so I'm actually super excited to answer this. And I'd say the entire youth climate movement sees an Office of Young Americans as not only beneficial, but absolutely critical to climate efforts, especially this late in the game. At the end of the day, young Americans are the ones that will face the largest impacts of climate change. You and I have the most on the line. But this concept of youth involvement being critical isn't theoretical, and we have precedent to show that when we get involved, it works. The best example I can think of right now is the Sunrise Movement. They reached 3.5 million voters in swing states the last presidential election and showed that when youth mobilize, they can make change, regardless of whether or not they have the ability to vote. In addition to this, when the members of the Sunrise Movement joined Biden's climate task force, his platform on the climate crisis substantially improved. Putting a wider variety of youth voices at the table allows us to engage in this absolutely critical dialogue with members of our government. And I think I'd be open to implementing it in a lot of different ways. Having youth advisors work with not only agencies like the EPA and the Department of Interior, but also the State Department and the Department of Labor ensures that we view the climate crisis through an intersectional and international lens. A diverse Office of Young Americans would be absolutely game-changing when it comes to how we tackle the climate crisis. And I think it is absolutely crucial that Biden encourages youth to get involved and creates an infrastructure for us to do so.
Thank you so much, Connor. I loved the passion in that speech. It was really beautiful, and it's so important. You know, Connor brought up a very important point, which is that, you know, this is really a game changer to consider if we're having youth be involved in these governmental bodies, right? Especially at an international scale, it's incredibly important. And right now, we're even seeing that with the development of the COP26 conference. So let's talk about that, right? The development of international action on climate change, where youth are really pushing for more young and intersectional voices to lead the upcoming COP26 conference. Politico News has recently coined the development of the conference as a visionless climate summit with broad aspirations. And so I'd love to pose this question for Lana Weidgenant, and it is, how do you think youth can mold the conference to have significant outcomes? And what do you think it will take for their voices to be heard?
Thank you, Lorena, for this great question. I think it's directly related to what Connor was just talking about, right? That a leadership from young people and really meaningful involvement in decision making can be transformational, can be a game changer, not just in the US, but around the world. So for anyone who doesn't know, COP26 is the United Nations Climate Change Conference. It happens once a year and brings together world leaders to decide what they're going to do next for climate action. So as a young person advocating for action against the climate crisis, you can see how this is a really critical event where if we really were going to turn things around and get on track to fighting climate change, this is a wonderful opportunity to do it. You have the leads of governments around the world all in one room, and you just need them to take sufficient action. Sadly, that has not happened in the past, with COP25 last year not living up to the last climate conference. Obviously, we didn't have one in 2020, but the latest one, COP25, did not live up to expectation. And once again, it looks like there are doubts about the upcoming climate conference this November, being able to really live up to the potential that it has to put us on track and to get sufficient action on climate change. Some ways that young people have been looking to influence this conference is through specific asks that we collectively make. So some of the asks that young people are making already through campaigns include through She Changes Climate, which is asking for equal female leadership in the COP26 team to male leadership, which right now is definitely outweighed and not enough female leadership. There is Polluters Out and Glasgow Calls Out Polluters, which are both asking for fossil fuel industry lobbyists and other fossil fuel representatives to not be present in the conference and in the negotiations that happen there on climate change. And there is Food at COP, which is another international youth-led initiative for climate-friendly food that aligns with the climate action looking to be taken there to also be served at the conference and addressing how food is connected to climate change. So those are some examples. And one way we can really be influential is by joining together as young people and calling on them to make all of these different actions and to specifically live up to what we need at this conference. Some other ways that young people can impact includes at the conference itself, either if it ends up being hybrid or virtual, impacting there. If it ends up being in person, there's a long history of youth doing actions and protests at the event itself in order to, at the last minute, call on those going into negotiations and coming out to stand up and actually take a stand against climate change, take sufficient action. And another important opportunity is COI, or the United Nations Conference of Youth, which is the official youth event precursor to COP26. And young people there officially deliver a document to COP26 with what young people want from the conference. So if you're getting involved in the COI process, you can then more officially inform, and I'm happy to talk to anyone interested in that as a US country coordinator. So those are some of the ways that young people can push this important event in countries around the world to act efficiently as they need to.
Thank you so much, Lana. And of course, thank you to all of our speakers who were able to join us today. It really means a lot. And of course, if you are watching this, thank you for taking the time to watch this important panel discussion with all these amazing speakers. And before we finish off, I want to share some of our social media so that you can keep on track with all of the work that we're doing as of right now. So you can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and of course, we have our email listed as well if you have any questions. So thank you again to everyone who was able to join us, and we are so excited to see how we can work together to really push for more climate action within the area. Thank you.